Hello everyone, bachphotography again, coming to you from a stormy beach here in Australia. And today we're going to be looking at my new camera that I just bought last week, which I'm very excited to talk to you with. That is the Sony A7R4 camera. And this video is going to be kind of a hands-on review and a first look at this camera, what I like about it, what I don't like about it so much, some of the quirks and features that I've experienced so far. I'm going to take you through my first photo shoot with this camera, and I'm also going to do some editing at the end with the new RAW files in this photo shoot. And I'm also going to leave a link in the description to these RAW files if you would like to have a look at them yourself and have a go at editing them in Photoshop. So let's start with the specifications of this camera. It was released in July 2019 and it has a 61 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor. There's no anti-aliasing filter on that sensor, so depending on whether you care more about removing artifacts or if you want sharpness in your image, then that could be a good thing or a bad thing. It has a native ISO of 100, which goes all the way up to 32,000, and that can be digitally expanded either down to 50 ISO or all the way up to 102,800 ISO. It uses a Sony E-mount on the camera, but I like to use a Sony MC11 to Canon lens adapter so that I can use all of my Canon lenses on my camera. It has 10 FPS continuous shooting, and this is something that I really found useful in this camera. It weighs 665 grams, so about the same as my old Sony A7R2 camera, and it has weather sealing in the body as well. And the final piece of tech that I really like about this camera is that it can shoot at 120 frames per second, which means that we can slow down the footage 4 times and still get nice, smooth video. So my first impressions when using this camera, when I compare it to my old Sony A7R2, are that it is absolutely, completely better in every single way. And even when I compare it to my Canon 5D Mark IV, I still find that in basically every single way, this is a far superior camera for me. There was a lot of things about the Sony A7R2 that kind of turned me off of the Sony A7 series and mirrorless cameras in general. When I bought my Sony A7R2 in 2016, there were a lot of things that made it feel like it was an unfinished product and it was a first generation product, not a complete, seamless, elegant camera that could be used by the professional. There were things like it overheating that happened to me a couple of times, and the camera freezing at important moments, which absolutely should not happen to you when you're shooting things like weddings. And all of these sorts of things really made me wonder whether this was going to be a good professional camera. But all of these problems seem to have been solved with the Sony A7R4. And I haven't had any problems with the camera overheating, I haven't had any issues with it freezing at any given moment or the screen going black, and all of these sorts of little things that cause the A7R2 to really not be a good professional camera. The camera also is a little bit different in its dimensions compared to the old Sony A7R2 and 3. It's a little bit thicker, so it's got a nicer grip that feels more steady in your hand. I prefer the grip on the A7R4, that's for sure. It also has way better autofocus capabilities and a few software upgrades compared to the A7R2 that I really like the eye autofocus and also the extra focus points that this camera has compared to my old A7R2. So my A7R4 has 567 autofocus points compared to 399 with my old camera, and that really makes a huge difference, particularly with the lenses that I've had trouble with focus hunting in the past, and those are the Sigma lenses, the 35mm and the 85mm in particular. And the 85mm was really bad, to the point where I actually only used manual focus on my A7R2 with that lens. But maybe because of the extra focus points, maybe because the software in camera is better, but I don't actually have to use manual focus on my new camera with this lens. Big one for me is that it has 2 SD card slots, and I think this is really important not to overlook if you're doing photography professionally and you need to deliver some photos to your clients no matter what, because there's nothing worse than shooting with one SD card and then that SD card breaks irreparably and you lose all of the photos, especially for things like weddings or for any clients that are paying money to get these photos. So having 2 SD card slots really gives you peace of mind, and that redundancy is really going to help you in any situation where your SD card gets corrupted. If you're finding this video useful or interesting so far, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps me out a lot in the YouTube algorithm, so thank you very much for subscribing. So now for something I really don't like about the A7R4, and that's its backward compatibility, or lack thereof, of any A7R2 batteries. Now I understand that they needed to make a bigger battery so that it could accommodate the bigger file sizes and the more data that has to be transferred in this camera, and also the fact that it has a touchscreen compared to the A7R2. And I know a lot of people's complaints was that the battery was just lacking the capacity needed to go through a full day of shooting. But I think that they could have implemented a way in the casing in the camera to allow for old A7R2 batteries to be compatible with this camera, because I have about 4 or 5 of the A7R2 batteries and now I don't have any use for them, which I think is a bit of a shame. But if you're new to the Sony ecosystem, then this won't be a problem for you. And I actually think that even though they only gave one battery with this camera, the battery life of that battery is so good that you can actually shoot an entire photo shoot, in my opinion, with that one battery. And like SD cards, it's always nice to have a backup battery just in case your first one fails, but it's nice that you might not even have to change that battery out on an entire photo shoot, because it seems to me that you can shoot about 800 photos on a single battery. And this is going to depend on what sort of photos you're taking. So a long exposure photo is going to take up more battery life than a fast shutter speed photo, but I found about 800 photos was where my battery started to run out of power. If you're thinking of buying one of these cameras, you need to factor in the really fast SD cards as part of the expense for this camera, because I'm shooting mainly with the SanDisk Extreme Pro black cards, which are 95 megabytes per second read speed, and that is quite fast, but it is not fast enough for getting all of those photos you're taking from your buffer in your camera onto the SD card, especially at 10 frames per second. So one thing I found is that my buffer runs out very quickly because my SD cards are not up to scratch for the task of transferring all of that data from the camera onto the cards. So you will need to buy some of the really fast SD cards, maybe the SanDisk Extreme Pro 300 megabytes per second card or something like that, so you can get all of those photos onto your SD card really fast and not hit the buffer wall of your camera. And if you're unsure on any of the terminology I've used in this video, then you need to check out my photography course from absolute beginner all the way to an advanced portrait photographer. It's going to teach you everything you need to know about camera equipment, lighting equipment, how to set up your camera, what settings you need to use, how to manipulate light in the best way, how to pose your subjects, and everything else you will need to know about portrait photography to take amazing photos. Right now, there's a 10% off discount for the next 30 days, so check out the link in the description if you're interested in that. So now let's have a look at some of the photos I took on this photo shoot fully edited, and a link to the raw files from this photo shoot are going to be in the description, because we're going to edit one of these photos together at the end of this video as well. So this is the photo that we're going to be editing now, and I hope you enjoyed those photos that I showed you just before, and let me know in the comments which one is your favorite. I chose this one to show you guys because, as you can see, she's quite far away from the camera here, and even though Michaela is quite far away from the camera, we can zoom right in and it is really nice and sharp. It looks low contrast, but you can see here that we're right at the pixel level and this is still nice and sharp. And the reason it's low contrast is because we were shooting at a really windy day and there was a lot of water going onto my lens and a lot of water droplets on there as well, so we lost a little bit of the contrast because of the refraction of the light going into the lens because of the water droplets. So you can also see that I haven't composed this image very well here. We've got a lot more space on this side than we do on this side, and that's one really nice thing about this camera is I can crop back in and still have a high resolution image. So to get rid of the low contrast in this photo, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to boost the clarity up a little bit, and then also the contrast as well. And we're going to up the vibrance as well, just because when you lose contrast you also lose the colors too. So now that we've done that, I'm just going to get a brush tool, but before we do that, actually I'm just going to drop the highlight slightly to make this image look a little bit more moody compared to having high highlights. Now I'm going to get the brush tool, I'm going to zoom in and just do a bit of skin smoothing, so dropping the clarity and leaving all the other things the same except the exposures and the blacks. This is just so I can find a masking tool of the area that I am selecting, just so I can make sure not to go over any hard lines on Michaela's skin, because I'm just using this tool right now to smooth the skin in a rough and quick way for the video, just to make the skin look nice and smooth. But we want to always make sure not to go too far with this smoothing technique, because it can make skin look a little bit strange if we over smooth it. And there are better ways to smooth skin if you have a lot of time, using things like the patch tool just to separate the frequencies and the textures from the colors. And that can be a really great way of making the skin nice and smooth, but this is a really fast way of doing it, and I think it gets you 90% of the way there. So even when I am using frequency separation, this is a way I like to smooth the skin as a first pass. And you can see the detail that we can get with this camera is quite amazing. And it was a very, very cold day, so I want to thank Michaela once again, if you're watching, for putting up with the freezing weather that we had on this day, in this stormy Australian day. So I'm going to do all of the arms and the legs and anywhere on the skin that doesn't have any feature points. Basically that's just to smooth the entire area. So now we're just going to do the legs finally. And just making sure not to go over any hard lines so we don't lose any detail for any of the parts of the image that are important. Now I'm going to get rid of those exposure and black adjustments, and then you can see now that I've got the clarity down, the smoothness can be changed. So I'm just going to go about 30 points. Then I'm going to reset my brush tool and just add a little bit more depth into the hair just by adding some more shadows and highlights at the same time. And this is similar to adding contrast. When you add contrast, you're basically adding more blacks and more whites, and that could be considered, contrast can be considered to saturation, as changing highlights and shadows is vibrance. It's not going to be changing the really, really white parts or the really black parts when you change these little areas here. Okay, so next we're going to reset the brush tool once more, and I'm going to just add a little bit more of the shadows and the clarity into the eyebrows just to make them kind of stand out a little bit more. And then we're going to do that again, but just a little bit less for the eyelashes because they are a little bit darker already. Once we've done that, we're going to reset our tool once more, and then I'm going to add a little bit more exposure and contrast into the eyes. That's just to make the eyes kind of pop from the scene. Even though they're small, they can now be seen in the image. They're small in the image, not small on Michaela's face. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is add some more blue to the image as well, and that's basically just to add a little bit more color to the dress here as well. And then that's everything we're going to do in Camera Raw. So you can see here that it takes a little bit of time to load on this computer, and I'm running a pretty powerful computer here. I have a gaming computer that has a nice i9 CPU, and it also has a 2070 graphics card, which is a not the best graphics card you can get, but quite a good graphics card. So you're going to need quite beefy technology if you want to use these sorts of files from such a powerful camera, and each of these files is 120 megabytes in size, so they're really, really big. So now I'm just going to use the cropping tool here just to have a nice crop in this image that I like, and I'll just straighten the horizon as well. We can see we've got some sea foam here too that I might just get rid of, and then once we've done that, I think we have a much nicer composition in this image. So this is everything I'm actually going to do to this photo. I really hope you like it, and I really hope that you found this video informative about the Sony A7R4 camera. I've really enjoyed using it over the last few days, and this first photo shoot was a real thrill to change my camera and get something a little bit better for this video. So thank you very much for watching. If you got this far to the end of the video, I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next video.